Hello and welcome to today's episode of the TAP 2020 webinar series. Today we will discuss soil health and the important role it plays in helping agriculture adapt to extreme weather patterns and harmful environmental trends. Our distinguished speaker today will be soil health expert Clay Pope, consultant to the USDA Southern Plains Climate Hub. Clay holds a BS in Agricultural Communications from Oklahoma State University, and he was elected to serve as a board member of the Oklahoma Wheat Growers Association in 2019. He has received numerous honors, including the Oklahoma Farmers Union Legislative Leadership Award, the NRCS Oklahoma Conservationist of the Year Award, the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts President's Award, the Oklahoma Farm Bureau Legislative Meritorious Service Award, and the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association Representative of the Year Award. In 1999, Clay was named Agricultural Man of the Year for Oklahoma by Progressive Farmer magazine, and in 2005, he was named a Graduate of Distinction from the College of Agriculture at Oklahoma State University. In 2013, Clay was recognized by the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences with a Regional Emmy Award for his outreach and educational work in conjunction with the Ken Burns documentary, The Dust Bowl. And before we start, we will be muting everyone during the presentation, but please type any questions or comments into the chat box in the webinar dashboard, and we will cover them all at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clay.
Well, thanks. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through all right on the computer?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the introduction. I don't know how much of a soil health expert I am, but I do appreciate the chance to come and visit with you a little bit about soil health and talk about how working with our natural resource base in the soil, we can get a handle on so many of our environmental challenges, while at the same time providing the food and fiber that we need to feed and clothe the world. As you can see by my page here, the title of my talk, you want to fight climate change, clean the water, feed the world. The secret is in the soil. And I think that's important starting out to really point out that so many times, we have so many of these big challenges that are staring us in the face. We see so many things on the horizon and around us that are challenges when you're talking about making sure we protect that resource base for future generations, making sure that we can adapt and mitigate some of the challenges that we're seeing with our changing climate. And at the same time, do it in a way that allows us to have strong economic activity. We see all this stuff in front of us. A lot of times the secret to these challenges really is right. Hang on just a second. I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here. There we go. Because so much of the time when you do think about soil, people just think about soil just being plain old dirt. And everybody wants to know, what is the big thing about the dirt? Why are we so interested? In it? Well, in all honesty, the soil is alive. It is an ecosystem unto itself. There's a lot more life in it than there are life forms on it than there are people walking on the face of the earth right now. And that's what, if you have it, that's one of the things when you stop and think about the situation with our soil. Right now, that ecosystem is starving, naked, and has a fever. That's not sustainable. What do I mean by that? We're doing things that aren't feeding that microbial subsoil community. Plus, it's naked because so much of our soil, especially agricultural land, is under intensive tillage, and so a lot of it's covered. A lot of the residue is taken off the ground every year, and it's exposed to the elements, which in turn affects the temperature of that soil. So again, that ecosystem is starving, naked, and has a fever. But restoring the health of that soil can play a key role in addressing so many of our environmental problems. And like I said, help agriculture producers' bottom lines. Now, what exactly is soil health? I mean, let's just kind of go through this real quick. Soil health is defined as a continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. This speaks to the importance of managing soil so they are sustainable for future generations. To do this, we need to remember that the soil contains living organisms that, when provided the basic necessities of life, food, shelter, and water, perform functions required to produce food and fiber. That microbial life system that I talked about, the bugs, bacteria, and fungi that live underneath the soil, have a symbiotic relationship with the plants growing on the surface of the ground. And these are things that just now we're starting to understand. Mentioned during my introduction, I'm a graduate of Oklahoma State University. When I took soils back in school back at Oklahoma State, we used to call it rocks and clods. And when you think about what we were taught in our soils class, so much of what we understand now, we talked so much about geology, we talked about mineralization, we didn't really talk about that relationship of that microbial community with plants. And so a lot of these are things that we're just now starting to truly understand. Continuing on with soil health, only living things can have health. So viewing soil as a living ecosystem reflects a fundamental shift in the way that we care for our nation's soils. They're not just an growing medium. They're not just something to put plants in and then bring everything else to it. In fact, a lot of times in the past, we kind of treated the soil as a petri dish, as something that we need to bring all the inputs to. But rather, as I said, it's teeming with billions of bacteria, fungi, and other microbes that are foundations of an elegant ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that can be managed to provide nutrients for plant growth, absorb and hold rainwater for use during drier periods, filter and buffer potential pollutants from leaving our fields, and serve as a firm foundation for agriculture activities that provide habitat for soil microbes to flourish and diversify to keep the ecosystem running smoothly. Healthy soils give us clean air and water, bountiful crops, productive grazing lands, diverse wildlife, and beautiful landscapes. It does all this by performing 5 essential functions. Regulating water. Soil helps control where rain, snowmelt, and irrigation water goes. Water is dissolved and solutes flow over the land and into and through the soil. It sustains plant and animal life. The diversity and productivity of living things depend again on the soil. Filtering and buffering potential pollutants. The minerals and microbes in soils are responsible for filtering, buffering, degrading, immobilizing, and detoxifying organic and inorganic materials. Cycling nutrients. Carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and many other nutrients are stored, transformed, and cycled in the soil. Physical stability and support soil structure provides a medium for plant roots. Now, all of this is why is all this important? Everything that I've gone through, why is soil health important, and why is it something, especially from the perspective of USDA, are we really pushing? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I work for the Climate Hub, and we're charged with trying to work with folks to come up with strategies to deal with extreme weather events that are being exacerbated by our changing climate. We've got to harden our agriculture system to those extreme weather events, because when you talk about climate change, when you see what we're dealing with moving forward into the future, really what we're talking about is the crazy weather on the southern plains that we've always had is just getting a little crazier. The droughts are going to get longer and hotter. Rain's going to come in chunks. The rainfall patterns are going to change. We're going to see more volatility in our temperatures. Soil health is the best way to harden our agriculture systems to those changes that we're seeing on the horizon. We need to use what we can to help agriculture address environmental concerns voluntarily. We've got big challenges out there, whether you're talking about water quality, again, climate change, soil erosion, all those issues where agriculture impacts the environment. Soil health is a great tool for getting a crack on those. We need to protect our water, both quality and quantity, and that ties in with the extreme weather events, whether you're talking about droughts, trying to make sure not only agriculture can hold on to more of that moisture when it does come, to extend the subsoil moisture to try to ride out flash droughts especially, but also ensuring that you've got enough water in the soil profile that you're having more intermittent stream flow, and helping as far as ensuring that you can have a more steady flow for folks downstream, and quality. Again, making sure that we're protecting the quality of water, because you can have all the water in the world, but if it's not fit to drink, you really don't have anything. So again, providing those tools to help us to address those issues. We've got to control soil erosion, and I can't stress this enough. This is an issue that really people don't talk about. I'll touch on it a little bit more later in the talk, but the basis of civilization rests on an inch of topsoil, and when it's gone, it's gone. We've got to protect that resource to provide the food and fiber that we need for future generations. And we need to help produce bottom lines. If we're talking about being sustainable, if you're not financially sustainable, nothing else is going to work. You've got to be able to make a living. Farming and ranching is not a charity operation. We've got to increase organic matter. Now, what do I mean by that last one? Well, soil organic matter is the fraction of the soil that consists of plant and animal tissues in various stages of breakdown or decomposition. And our most productive agriculture soils have between 3 and 6% organic matter. But we've lost anywhere from 60 to 90% of our organic matter from original plow up. So it's important that we get the organic matter back. And it's composed 45 to 50% of carbon, along with oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Now, that carbon part, we all learned back in junior high biology. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide, breathe out oxygen. If you don't disturb the soil, that CO2 goes back into the soil and sequestered. And so that's also a way that we can start getting a handle on some of the challenges that we're seeing with greenhouse gases. Now, again, why organic matter? It holds moisture, helps reduce erosion, and provides the food and housing for the subsoil microbial community under the soil. One of the things that I've told producers a lot of times when I talk to them, if you're not doing things to help increase organic matter and improve the health of your soil, if you're not doing things to feed that microbial community, do yourself a favor. Don't farm. Go down to the bank, pull your money out, and go to the creek and start throwing dollar bills in, because that's basically what you're doing. We have to do things to help improve the health of the soil, to improve our bottom line, and help the environment. According to Kansas State University, if we can increase organic matter by 1%, you can triple the soil's water holding capacity. That's over 25,000 gallons of water per acre available for growing plants and forage. Now, a personal story right now. I work for USDA, so I'm a consultant. I do that part-time. I also farm with my mother and my brother up here in northwest Oklahoma. I'm actually talking to you from my office at Loyal, Oklahoma, in our house on a half section where my wife and me and my kids live. We've got wheat in the ground right now. My brother and I farm using soil health practices. We no-till, we use covers, we incorporate livestock. Our wheat right now is holding on better than some of our neighbors. We're in a real dry trend right now. We need to drink water pretty bad. But I can tell you, by having that increase in organic matter, by having that increase in the soil's water holding capacity, it helps you ride out dry times better. I'm going to give you a personal testimony to that, because we're seeing it right now. A 1% increase in organic matter has been shown to make available up to as much as $700 worth of additional nutrients per acre for growing crops, according to Ohio State University. Now, I like to throw this out there because it's a good number, but I can't tell you that's going to be the same in Oklahoma or Texas and Kansas or anywhere else. But I can tell you this, whether it's $700 or whether it's $7, if you don't want that money, I'll take it. And I can tell you from personal experience, the last 4 years, my brother and I, we've seen the change in our own operation. We've had 4 of the best wheat crops we have ever had in our part of Oklahoma for our operation, and we've done it using half the fertilizer that we used when we were farming conventionally. You can do things to free up those nutrients for plants. I mentioned that symbiotic relationship between that microbial community and plants growing on the surface. According to Agricultural Research Service, as much as 60% of the fertilizer that we put down on the ground, we're just wasting because you don't have a healthy subsoil microbial community, because those bacteria and fungi and microbes actually make those nutrients more readily available for growing plants. Kind of like I grew up on when I was a kid, we milked cows, and I used to give a lot of 4-H and FFA dairy speeches. And if you've ever heard a kid give a 4-H or FFA dairy speech, there's always that obligatory line where they talk about calcium. And they say that taking a calcium supplement is good, but drinking a glass of milk is better, because not only does milk have calcium, it also has the vitamin D, vitamin B, vitamin C, all those other nutrients that helps your body more readily assimilate the calcium, because it helps to feed that microbial community in your gut. Soil works the same way. If we can do things to improve the health of the soil, improve the health of that microbial community, then whatever we add to the ground, those plants can more readily take it up. Plus, you can reduce the amount of fertilizer you have to put down, and in some cases, eliminate some of the inputs that you're doing right now, which not only helps the environment, but again, helps farmers and ranchers make money. It's the best way, as I mentioned, to harden ourselves to extreme weather events, to climate change. It's something that, again, has multiple benefits that does a lot of good, and that's one of the things, again, when we talk about building the health of the soil, improving organic matter is one of the big ones, because we are dealing with a lot of challenges. And I like to bring this up because, depending on who you talk to, a lot of times you say climate change, folks think about it as a dirty word. They either think it's a commie plot, or, they think it's a big myth, or that, I mentioned I've got kids, and so I've read all the Harry Potter books with them. They think it's like Lord Voldemort. It may actually be out there, but it's that which should not be named. Well, bottom line is the climate is changing, and we've got to be prepared for it. And again, improving the health of the soil is one of the best ways that we can better prepare production agriculture to deal with those extreme weather events. But even if you don't believe in climate change, everybody believes in droughts and floods, and everybody knows that we have challenges with water quality. Doing things to improve the health of the soil, those same practices that we want to do to improve soil health or regenerative agriculture, whatever you want to call it, are the exact same things that we want to do to help control non-point source pollution in our water, and again, improve the water holding capacity of the soil to improve the amount of water that we have in the subsoil. If you're in Oklahoma, you've ever heard Gary McManus, the state climatologist, talk about droughts. He always talks about how droughts feed on themselves. Because if we don't have enough subsoil moisture. There's a connection between the water in the atmosphere and the water in the soil. If we don't have good subsoil moisture, it takes a lot more energy to break those droughts. One of the things that we can do, again, to help both on the quantity and quality, I'm going to talk a little bit more about water quality in Oklahoma, but the numbers are out there, and it's clear by doing the practices, things like converting to no-till, incorporating cover crops in your operation, doing better pasture management, planting grass on highly erodible land, and running livestock on it. Those practices, we have shown measurable, significant reductions of non-point source pollution in the water in Oklahoma. I'll talk on that a little bit later. And then I mentioned soil erosion, and I have this picture of the Dust Bowl. Again, erosion is something that we do an outstanding job on controlling in Oklahoma, but we've got a long way to go, and I'll show you some numbers here in a little bit. But again, I can't stress enough that topsoil, that inch of topsoil, is what all of civilization rests on. And it takes, in some cases, in this part of the world, when that soil started to form, Christopher Columbus was in diapers. We've got to make sure that we protect it, because when it's gone, and it's not coming back. So let's talk a little bit about some of these soil health and water quality. There's actually numbers out there that no-till alone can reduce erosion by over 90% and phosphorus loads in water by over 60%. Cover crops can cut nitrate loads in half. Pasture management can reduce sedimentation by nearly 50%, nitrogen loads by over 60%, and phosphorus loads by over 70%. Buffer strips and grass plantings can reduce nitrogen by over 80%. Again, talking about erosion, I mentioned the same practices that increase organic matter, reduce erosion. Reducing erosion also reduces non-point source pollution. I told you that a little bit ago. On average, the U.S. loses 5.8 tons of soil per acre per year. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it is. But in Oklahoma, we can take a little bit of pride. Also, our neighbors to the north in Kansas, we lose a little over 2.5 tons of soil per acre per year. But that's extremely important because, as I tell you, Oklahoma and Kansas does some of the best soil conservation work in the world. Our neighbor to the south loses over 8 tons of soil per acre per year. I don't care where you're coming from. That is not sustainable. But with that 2.5 tons that we lose in Oklahoma, we still lose nearly 3 pounds of soil every year for every pound of wheat we grow in Oklahoma. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. I mentioned Oklahoma does an outstanding job of controlling soil erosion. The drought from 2011 to 2015, we all remember what we came through just a few years ago. That is a drought on record in Oklahoma. Did you see the return of the dust storms? That drought was worse than the drought of the 1930s that caused the Dust Bowl. We saw some dirt moving around, but we saw nothing that compared to the dust storms that started in Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas and blew all the way across the country, and in some cases covered ships out in the Atlantic Ocean with topsoil that started in the Great Plains. In fact, one day there was a storm that came through Washington, D.C., turned the street lights on. It was actually on the same day that they were debating the original Soil Conservation Act, and there's a great story behind that. I'm not going to touch on it here, but it's something that, it was really a challenge back here in the Dust Bowl. Storm came in, street lights came on. The next day in the Washington Post, FDR said, "I ran my fingers on my desk and held Oklahoma in my hands." In fact, on Black Sunday, the worst dust storm of the Dust Bowl, it's been estimated that more dirt was moved by that storm than was moved to excavate the entire Panama Canal. We didn't see anything like that in 2011, 2015. In fact, we didn't see anything like that in the 1950s. If the drought of the 50s was worse than the drought of the 30s, and the drought from 2011 to 2015 was worse than the drought of the 1950s. And again, we didn't see a new Dust Bowl. But I say all that just to point out that even with that good conservation work we do in Oklahoma, we still lose 3 pounds of soil for every pound of wheat we grow. We've got to take care of that. It's not sustainable for environmental, when you think about the environmental impact, but also if we're going to feed and clothe 9 billion people by mid-century. We've got to protect that soil resource. Now, climate change, organic matter, soil health also helps mitigate climate change. I mentioned that over half of organic matter is carbon. And we all learned that carbon dioxide is sucked out of the air through photosynthesis, put back in the soil, oxygen released. No-till in Oklahoma has been shown to sequester around 0.5 metric ton of carbon dioxide per acre per year. No-till uses 3 gallons of diesel less per acre per year. So not only are you sequestering carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, you're also burning less diesel, putting less nitrous oxide in the atmosphere to begin with, doing a lot to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we're dealing with. According to the National Academy of Sciences a few years ago, they estimated that in Great Plains ag, if you could get 75% of the ag producers in the Great Plains to do soil health practices, Great Plains ag would be a net zero on greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there was just a report that came out this last week. I didn't include it in the talk, but from the Rodale Institute out of Pennsylvania. And they say unequivocally in their report that they believe that if we could get agriculture producers around the globe to accept soil health or regenerative agriculture practices, undertake them on their land, we could more than compensate for all of the carbon dioxide that was put out through human activity. Now, you can go and read that for yourself. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can guarantee you this. It's going to take a big whack out of our climate change problems, because this is the thing that so many people miss. We're talking about putting the climate cycle a little bit more back in balance. And that's one of the things we talk about, these environmental challenges that we're dealing with. So many of them are interconnected: the water cycle, the nutrient cycle, the carbon cycle. If we can do things to bring those things back a little bit better into balance, working with nature, we can do things that, again, can get us a long way down the road on dealing with this, and in the same way also help agriculture producers' bottom line. Because, again, there was just a 3-year study that was done by the National Association of Conservation Districts on 4 farms. Fertilizer costs went down by an average of over $50 an acre, and yield values increased by over $76 an acre, resulting in a net income increase of as much as $110 per acre when the producers in their study undertook soil health practices. It improved their bottom line. I'd mentioned that about our operation, about how we're using less fertilizer and seeing better yields. Also, when we plant cover crops in the summertime, we're running calves on those covers. So we're getting another 60, 90 days worth of grazing, another calf crop essentially, that then we'll go back in and plant winter wheat again and put calves out on wheat pasture like we always have done in the past, and then pull them off and harvest them in the spring and start the cycle over again. It's a situation where you can improve your bottom line. We're doing that with half of the fertilizer that we used to put down on the ground. And as I showed earlier, we're burning roughly $3 or 3 gallons of diesel less per acre per year to get it done as well. Soil loss equals as much as 15 bushels per acre in production Midwest corn ground, according to Lands and Lake Sustainability Program. Now, again, this isn't Oklahoma, this isn't Southern Plains, but they say that's how much, if you're not doing things to control erosion, you're losing as much as 15 bushels per acre on your corn ground in the Midwest. Again, I mentioned throwing your money in the creek if you're not doing soil health practices. If you're not doing things to help control soil erosion, same thing. Go down to the bank, get your money out, start throwing your dollar bills in the creek, because that's basically what you're doing if you're a farmer or rancher and not doing things to improve the health of your farm ground and your ranch land. If you're not improving the health of the microbial community under the soil, you're just wasting money. And if you lose about 0.37 inches of topsoil, that on those studies again that Land O'Lakes did, that was over $12,000 in lost yields and nutrients per acre over the decade that they measured it. By doing cover crops and no-till, you did still see soil loss, but that went from over $12,000 in lost nutrients and yields to about $500 per acre. Significant reduction, and that's something that I think, again, helping people's bottom lines is something that we really need to think about. And again, I mentioned water quality and about how these things are all tied together. Fighting climate change and protecting water quality and improving the health of soil all go hand in hand. Now, I'm going to brag on Oklahoma a little bit. This is actually an old number. I think Oklahoma's up to over 80 streams now that the state of Oklahoma has taken off of the EPA's impaired list, the 303D list, using soil health practices of no-till, cover crops, grass planting, pasture management, and repairing and restoration. One time, we actually had a carbon program in Oklahoma, too, where we had over 50,000 acres that were being signed up, where producers were actually being paid for the carbon dioxide that they were sequestering underneath the soil. Again, helping people's bottom line and help the environment don't have to be mutually exclusive practices. They can work hand in hand. In 2015, we actually did a study that showed that the practices that the state of Oklahoma did on a handful of watersheds to help take them off of the 303D list also reduced greenhouse gas levels by over 35,000 tons of CO2 equivalent every year. So those practices are still out there. When those guys switched to no-till, they planted grass, they started doing these practices. Those things continue to this day. That CO2 is still being taken out. Now, how's it done? It's got to be some complicated Rube Goldberg design to actually reach these kind of goals, right? Well, what can ag producers do to improve the health of the soil? Well, first of all, reduce tillage, preferably no-till. I've mentioned that whole thing about the soil being naked and starved and having a fever. Well, the first thing is not to disturb that microbial community. Think about it yourself. How would you feel if over the course of a non-growing season, somebody came in and tore down your house and exposed you to the elements? Well, that's what we're doing in that microbial community. We need to do things to minimize tillage. That's the first thought. Plant cover crops. I said the soil was starving. That ecosystem needs to continually feed. If you stop and think about it, nature abhors bare ground. We need to keep something growing as much as possible. Following our cash crops with cover crops, again, incorporating livestock too, so you help with that nutrient cycling, and having as much diversity in that cover crop mix as you can possibly have and still be affordable. Those are things that, again, can greatly improve the health of the soil. Better pasture management. There's things that we can do on our grasslands too, whether you're talking about mob grazing or just being mindful of your stocking rates to ensure that you're also improving the health of the soil on our grasslands. Plant grass on highly erodible land. Again, that taking that land that's in crop production, putting it back in grass, running livestock on it, and again, helping to improve the health of the soil and control erosion. Now, those are the big things that we push folks to do to improve the health of the soil. Now, how can farmers and ranchers harden their operation in extreme weather events? What can they do to be better prepared for the extreme droughts and floods that climate change is bringing about and the challenges that our changing climate is exacerbating? Well, they can go no-till, plant cover crops, better pasture management, plaster grass on highly erodible land. That's the best ways that they can harden their operation in extreme weather. Now, what can we do to address non-point source pollution? You start to see a trend here. These things all work together. And I think that's really the big thing to keep in mind. Because when our resources are gone, they're gone. I mentioned about, I mentioned about water. Cleopatra may very well have bathed in the coffee or the water that you're drinking right now. I mentioned Columbus when his diapers when that topsoil started to form. We've got to do what we can to protect those resources. Because again, we got to feed 9 billion people by mid-century. Now, if you're an agriculture producer, let's even take the touchy-feely part out of it. Let's just get mercenary for a second. The basis of your wealth is your soil. Your land is the basis of your wealth. If you're borrowing money from the bank, 9 times out of 10, what's your collateral? What's land going for where you live? We've got to protect that resource to make sure not only that we can feed and clothe everybody, but again, that we can protect our bottom line and help sustain our operations and, quite frankly, our civilization. And we got to feed those 9 billion people. And even if you don't believe in climate change, everybody believes in droughts and floods. And doing things to control erosion, to hold on to more moisture when it does rain, those are things that we all should be able to get around and agree on, because we always have had to deal with droughts and floods. The changing climate is just saying that the crazy weather we've always had is getting shot full of steroids. Everybody should be able to come around this. So many times the environment and agriculture it seems like they're at loggerheads. This is the one place where we ought to be able to come around the fire for a little while and sing Kumbaya. Because again, what we're talking about is getting those cycles a little bit back in balance. Getting the carbon cycle, the water cycle, and the nutrient cycle. We're not going to get them completely back in balance, but doing things to try to get them a little bit more on plumb and try to get a handle on some of these challenges that we're seeing. Now, again, if you take anything away from this talk, look at these points. Many of the same practices we use to improve soil health are the same practices that help us address non-point source pollution. Again, Oklahoma is a great example. That 80 streams that I said that they've taken off 303 D list, the most of any state in the nation. And they've done it through voluntary conservation programs, working with agriculture producers. They've got the most successful non-point source pollution program in the country, and it's by doing soil health practices. Those same practices address non-point source pollution. They also can help with stream flow, help us be better prepared for droughts. They can control soil erosion, make sure that we protect that land resource. These same practices can help agriculture adapt to extreme weather while reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, doing things to help deal not only adapt to climate change, but help mitigate some of climate change's root causes, And the same practices that help agriculture deal with environmental problems and help folks' bottom lines. All these things can work together, and I think that's the thing that we really need to take away from this. We can do things and do it in a way that, and when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about hobby farms. I'm not talking about organic farms, although those things have their place. I'm talking about what we would consider to be normal commercial size agriculture operations, just doing things that are more sustainable. And again, not sustainable, not just from an environmental standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. These things can work together. Now, just to kind of close out, I'm a big fan of things that we've done in the past, and this is one of my favorite pictures. I actually used to work in conservation districts in Oklahoma, and this was a picture that was put out in the 1940s during World War II. And I've always thought that get your farming in the fight. Use conservation methods for bigger yields now. Back then, we understood that we needed to conserve the soil. We needed to do things a little bit different if we were going to feed and clothe our troops and provide the food that we needed, not just for ourselves and our allies. Change it a little bit though. Say help your farm feed the world. Use conservation methods for bigger yields now. Instead of the machinery of war in the background, you see all the people that we have to feed by mid-century. And we've got to do it in a way that protects our resource base. Because again, when those resources are gone, they're not coming back. We've got to protect that resource base, but at the same time, provide food and fiber for our ever-growing world. This is a way I think we can do it. A lot of people talk about the green revolution. I think we're on the cusp of another revolution in production agriculture, but instead of green this time, it's brown. And I think that's what we need to focus on, is how we can improve the health of the soil and have a real paradigm shift in production agriculture. With that, there's some of the references that I've got that kind of hits on some of the things that I talked about in the slideshow. And with that, that's my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Clay. That was terrific. Okay, it got me fired up. So one of the first questions we have is, what do you use for cover crops?
Well, the thing that we use on cover crops right now, that's a really good question, because a lot of times I've actually gotten a debate with a professor at Oklahoma State University that was arguing with me a little bit about soil health, and he said, well, first of all, they weren't grazing their crops, which was the first thing I told him was kind of a mistake in what he was doing. But he said something about, you do better planting milo after wheat than you would planting cover crops. And I said, well, I consider milo a cover crop. Now, it's not, it is a monoculture that you're also going to harvest for another grain crop. But I'm just saying, as long as you keep that ground, have something green and growing covering that soil, you're better off than having bare soil at any time. Now, what we do on our operation, as mentioned, we're winter wheat producers primarily. Once we cut our wheat in June, we follow it with a mix. This year we had a 14-way mix. I say 14-way. It had two different kinds of millet in it. It had cowpeas in it. It had some sun hemp in it. It had some sunflowers in it. It had okra in it, which, by the way, our cattle love okra. I still don't know why. There's something they're missing in their diet. They go after that okra like crazy. It had some other forbs in it. It had some beans in it, some additional legumes. Basically, it was 14 different species. We had some forage sorghum in that. There was also, I mentioned some millet that we had in there. Different species that were designed for different things. I mentioned the legumes, like your beans and your peas, and also your sun hemp, that's a legume, providing the nitrogen to the soil. You had things like sunflowers that had a real deep taproot that helped as far as mellowing up the soil, but also breaking that plow pan and allowing nutrients and water to flow throughout that soil profile a little easier. You had some things that had a more fibrous root system that addressed the upper levels of the soil. We had buckwheat, which actually helped pull phosphorus up out of the bottom layers of the soil and make it more readily available for the wheat that we planted now back again for a crop this winter. So again, it was a mix, and that's one of the things that we really try to push now. Everybody's got a different reality. I mean, you may be in an economic situation, you'll feel like you can go that way. My thing is, perfect should never be the enemy of good. I think the bottom line is as long as you've got something green and growing, you're ahead of the game. Whether you're trying to do something for a hay crop or a grain crop, or do what we do, planting a cover and then running cattle on it and using that as an additional source of forage for an additional calf crop. Either way, I think you're better than having that bare soil out there.
Okay, which actually leads us to a next question that came in, which is there such a thing as a native cover crop mix for the Southern Plains?
That's a real good question. I honestly don't know. Probably, I think you could put one together. I think the trick would be visiting with somebody who is a seed grower. Whether it's someone local or whether it's a national company that provides cover crop seeds. I'm sure they could put a mix together for you. They've got different ones. This isn't a native mix, but we actually planted. Now, it didn't work very well because the weather didn't cooperate with us. But we planted what they call a milpaw garden. Which is a cover crop mix that's primarily edible plants, your melons, uh, okra, squash, things like that, corn. And the idea was if it came up, we were going to glean it and we were going to donate what we gleaned off of that acre that we planted to a local food pantry. Now, the weather didn't cooperate with us, but some other folks have done it and had a lot of success. I don't know why you couldn't do a native mix. I think you just have to sit down and talk with somebody and see what you can put together.
Okay, and just to follow up that up, what's the ideal number of species that you should have in a cover crop mix?
I think it depends on what you're trying to do and what you're shooting for. The more species you have, the more I mentioned how we have different species that affect different layers of the soil that do different things, whether it's at deep taproot or lagoon or whatever. Now, Kansas State University, there's actually a professor up there that's been doing a lot of work, again, winter wheat being so prevalent in the southern plains, on grazing winter wheat versus or grazing covers after winter wheat, and looking at more species and less species. And then she kind of has put together kind of a table on what you might be looking at, whether you're trying to maximize soil health or whether you're trying to maximize profit and still get benefits. She said she's seeing good improvement in subsoil microbial levels and increased carbon sequestration by having about 4 or 5 species. It's not as pricey as having a 12 to 14 way mix, but by having that more biological diversity, you get more benefit, I believe, in feeding that microbial community. So I mean, it just depends on what reality you're looking at and what you're shooting for. And I think that I think is something that is also kind of exciting about this, because a lot of this we're learning as we go.
Okay, and then one more question. So is it possible to use a cover crop mix to try and help choke out or control non-native invasives?
I would think so. That's one of the things that by doing the covers, I mentioned that we do no-till and cover crops. We actually have been no-tilling since, 2004. But we've only been doing the cover crops for about the last 6-7 years. The big thing is on that is, as we've done the covers, when we were no-tilling, just straight no-tilling, we were leaving our ground fallow over the summertime after we cut our wheat, and we were going over it a couple more times with herbicides. That's bad for the. You have to do something, and you have to control the weeds. Either you have to control weeds somewhere. I'll put it that way. But it also is pricey to go over it with chemicals. We started looking at the covers, and that's one of the things that the cover crops allow us to do is actually to help actually with weed control. And then by the grazing of those animals, and then when you do your cover crop termination, it really does help as far as making sure that you can get those weeds under control. Now that's on cropland. Now, if you're trying to get rid of invasive species, I would think that you could come up with a strategy like that. In fact, one of the things that we're working on right now, we've got a producer here in Oklahoma that's got some CRP ground that's coming out of the program, and he's trying to figure out what to do with it, doing soil health practices. And that's actually, we're trying to get him into a grazing situation. And one of the things that we're concerned about is as that CRP has sat there over the decades, you've seen invasive species come into it, and so we're trying to do some things to try to factor that in. So that's part of the idea. So I mean, yes, you can control weeds, I know, with cover crop. So I don't know why you couldn't come up with something, especially if you incorporated something in as far as management of your woody species. I don't know why you couldn't do something like that.
Okay, that's something I'm going to follow up with you further on later. So next question, what are some symptoms of soil lacking specific nutrients?
Well, I mean, using your soil test, that's the first thing that I would say is when you're pulling your soil test and you're seeing that you're continuing to have to increase the amount of synthetic fertilizer that you're bringing to the ground, and you're not seeing the results really in your yields at the end. I mean, that's some of the big things I'd show you right there. Plus, going out and digging up that ground and looking at it. You can tell by the soil structure, by the color of the soil, what your organic matter looks like, and then following that with a laboratory test. Those would probably be your best ways to get your indication as to what you're looking at.
Okay, so that's good recommendation. So in some of these areas where we work, it's heavy clay content here in this part of the state. Will cover crops, are there any cover crops that will actually work on that heavy clay soil?
Yes, yes. And what I'd encourage you to do, and without being out on your place and really looking at what you're doing, if you're interested, the first thing I would do is I'd contact my local NRCS service center and see if someone, if the local DC could come out, if not the local district conservationist, see if someone from the state soil health team would be willing to come out and just kind of give you a once over on what you're looking at, and also kind of tell them what you have in mind. Questions like trying to come up with something to help control non-native invasives. That would be the kind of thing that I would ask them. What you're wanting to do with your land helps them kind of help you come up with a strategy on what you would do. So yes, definitely. And I think the best place to get the best recommendations and have somebody actually come out and look with it is starting with your local NRCS office.
Okay, very good. Well, I think that's it for questions. If anybody has any more questions, we have another minute here if you want to type it in your box. Otherwise, we will. I think we're going to wrap up for the day. This has been a fascinating, excellent presentation, Clay. So thank you so much for it. And I think we're done with questions for right now. This will be recorded and posted on our on the TAP website, and so you can look for it there, or there will also be a link to the recording that will go out to you after this is done. If you have any trouble accessing it, or you need to get it in a format that's easily shareable, please feel free to email me, jane@nativebutterflies.org. And with that, I think we are done. We will be continuing with our TAP webinars in the coming months, so please watch your email inbox, and we'll let you know as soon as the next one's up. So again, thank you so much, Clay, and thank you for everybody for attending today.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.